Black history is not a side note. It's the foundation of the American story. It's a story of pain and resilience, of a people who redefined freedom for all. But today, this history faces a coordinated campaign to erase and sanitize its truths. Across the country, political forces are working to silence the realities of Black Americans, rewriting the past to control the present. Book bans, restrictive laws, and defunding of cultural institutions are all part of this effort. The goal? To replace hard truths with a comfortable myth, severing the link between past injustices and present challenges. This isn't just a debate over curriculum. It's a war on memory itself. When we lose our true history, we lose the chance to build a more just future. The attack on history is strategic, fueled by political agendas that label honest lessons as divisive or unpatriotic. Critical race theory has become a catch-all villain, used to stoke fear and shut down any discussion of systemic racism. The real aim? To protect a fantasy America, one where slavery is minimized, civil rights heroes are sanitized, and systemic racism is denied. By erasing root causes of inequality, they argue no action is needed today. This isn't about unity or patriotism. It's about maintaining a narrative that absolves the present from the responsibilities of the past. The result is a national identity built on comforting lies, not challenging truths. And the cost is a society unable to confront or correct its own injustices. This campaign has moved from rhetoric to law. State legislatures across the country are passing bills that dictate what can and cannot be taught about race and history. These laws, cloaked in vague language, create fear and confusion for educators. The intent isn't better education, it's to enforce a sanitized, comfortable narrative. Teaching the realities of slavery, Jim Crow, and civil rights is now risky, even punishable. The term critical race theory is weaponized to justify these bans, even though it's rarely taught in K-12 schools. The goal? A generation that knows only triumphs, not the struggles that made them possible. This legislative assault shapes not just textbooks, but the very imagination of the future. The fight over history is now raging in local school board meetings. National talking points fuel angry crowds demanding book bans and teacher firings. Educators are vilified for teaching about slavery or civil rights. School boards are pressured into censorship. This isn't spontaneous, it's a coordinated campaign using parental rights as a cover for historical revisionism. The result? A patchwork of censorship, where what students learn depends on their zip code. In one district, honest history is taught, in another it's forbidden. This deepens educational inequity and leaves many with a distorted view of America's past. The battle at the school board is about whether schools will teach critical inquiry or ideological conformity. The most damaging effect isn't just banned books or new laws, it's the fear that now haunts classrooms. Teachers self-censor, skipping lessons, or avoiding important books to protect their jobs. History is quietly erased, not by decree, but by 1,000 small acts of caution. Students lose the chance to grapple with complex truths and develop critical thinking. The stories of Black resilience and resistance are replaced by a hollow, irrelevant history. This climate dishonors those who fought for justice and endured oppression. To erase their stories for political comfort is a profound disrespect. The chilling effect is a silent tragedy, suffocating the truth and robbing future generations of the lessons they need. At its core, Black history is a direct and powerful threat because it tells the unvarnished truth about America. It is a chronicle that refuses to be confined to a simple, celebratory narrative of uninterrupted progress and inherent goodness. Instead, it presents a far more complex and challenging story, one that is foundational to understanding the nation's true identity. Black history meticulously documents how the United States, a country conceived in the language of liberty, simultaneously built its economic and political power on the brutal institution of human bondage. It is a story that cannot be told without exposing the profound hypocrisy that lies at the heart of the American experiment. This truth is not an attack on America. It is America's story in its fullest, most honest form. For the political movement seeking to sanitize the past, This truth is inherently dangerous. Their power relies on promoting a mythology of American exceptionalism that cannot withstand historical scrutiny. This mythology requires a narrative where the nation's sins are either ignored, minimized, or framed as unfortunate but minor deviations from an otherwise righteous path. Black history demolishes this false narrative. It proves, with overwhelming evidence, that racism and exploitation were not bugs in the system. They were features, deliberately designed and legally codified for centuries. It reveals that the nation's wealth, from the cotton fields of the South to the financial institutions of the North, was inextricably linked to the stolen labor and lives of enslaved black people. This historical truth is a threat because it dismantles the comforting lies that have long propped up a specific version of American patriotism. It challenges the idea that the nation's founding was purely heroic. It complicates the legacies of revered historical figures, forcing a more nuanced understanding of men who spoke of freedom while owning other human beings. For those who benefit from the current social and political order, this is an unacceptable disruption. They understand that if the foundation of the national story is shown to be built on a bedrock of racial oppression, it becomes much harder to defend the inequalities that persist today. The truth of black history is a threat because it exposes the myth, and without the myth, the justifications for the status quo begin to crumble. Therefore, the campaign to erase black history is, in essence, a campaign to protect a fragile and fictitious national identity. It is an act of ideological self-preservation. By labeling these historical truths as divisive or hateful, they are attempting to discredit the evidence itself. They are treating history not as a field of inquiry, but as a public relations problem to be managed. They fear that if a generation of Americans learns this complete and honest history, they will no longer accept the sanitized version of the past that has been used to justify inaction in the present. Truth is the ultimate enemy of a political agenda built on a lie, and black history is the vessel that carries that powerful disruptive truth. Black history is a threat because it does more than just present facts. It teaches people how to ask critical questions. When students learn about the systematic denial of rights and humanity to black Americans, they naturally begin to interrogate the world around them. Learning about the brutal realities of slavery leads to the question, how could a nation dedicated to freedom allow this to happen? Studying the Jim Crow era prompts another. How did laws that were so obviously unjust remain in place for so long? Examining the civil rights movement inspires a further inquiry. What does it take to challenge an entrenched system of power? These are not just historical questions. They are civic and moral questions that have profound implications for the present. This process of questioning is what the opponents of black history fear most. An educated and inquisitive populace is a danger to any power structure that relies on public complacency and unthinking obedience. Questions lead to awareness, and awareness is the first step toward demanding accountability. If people understand the historical context of systemic inequality, they are less likely to accept simplistic and misleading explanations for modern-day disparities. They will start to see the connections between past injustices and present problems. They will question why certain communities have less wealth, poorer schools, and higher rates of incarceration. And once these questions are asked, they cannot be easily unasked. They lead to a deeper understanding of how power and privilege function in society. Ultimately, questions lead to a demand for change. This is the ultimate threat. The political agenda driving the erasure of black history is fundamentally conservative, not in the traditional political sense, but in its desire to conserve the existing social hierarchy. It seeks to protect a status quo where wealth, power, and opportunity remain unequally distributed along racial lines. A widespread understanding of black history directly undermines this goal. It provides the intellectual and moral framework for movements that seek to dismantle systemic racism, to reform institutions, and to create a more just and equitable society. The history of black resistance and liberation is in itself a roadmap for how change can be achieved. Therefore, silencing Black history is a preemptive strike against future social and political change. It is an attempt to stop the questions before they are ever asked. By keeping students ignorant of the root causes of inequality, the powerful hope to quell any potential for organized challenges to their authority. They prefer a citizenry that is patriotic in a passive, unquestioning way, rather than one that is engaged, critical, and committed to fulfilling the nation's promise of liberty and justice for all. They are not just afraid of the history itself, they are terrified of what people might do once they learn it. They fear that an awakened public will no longer tolerate the world as it is, and will begin to demand the world as it ought to be. Perhaps the most potent threat posed by Black history is its undeniable ability to draw a straight line from the injustices of the past to the inequalities of the present. It serves as a powerful corrective to the myth that America's racial problems were all solved by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It provides the essential context for understanding why, decades later, the fight for equality is far from over. When you learn about the history of redlining, the government-sanctioned policy of denying home loans and insurance to Black families, you can finally understand the roots of the staggering racial wealth gap that exists today. It ceases to be an abstract economic statistic and becomes the predictable outcome of discriminatory policy. This historical lens makes it impossible to ignore the systemic nature of racism. Without the history of convict leasing and racially biased drug laws, the gross overrepresentation of Black Americans in the prison system might be wrongly attributed to cultural or individual failings. But with that historical knowledge, it becomes clear that the modern mass incarceration system is a direct descendant of earlier forms of racial and social control. Likewise, learning about the violent suppression of Black voters during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era illuminates the true purpose behind present-day voter ID laws, polling place closures, and other tactics that disproportionately disenfranchise Black and brown communities. Black history provides the receipts, proving that today's inequalities are not accidents. This direct connection between past and present is a profound threat to those who wish to maintain the current power structure. If the public understands that today's racial disparities in health, education, and housing are not random, but are the result of centuries of deliberate policy choices, it leads to an inescapable conclusion. New policy choices are needed to fix them. This realization moves the conversation away from individual responsibility and toward collective, societal responsibility. It transforms the debate from one about personal prejudice to one about systemic reform. This is a conversation that opponents of Black history are desperate to avoid, as it logically leads to calls for reparations, affirmative action, and major investments in marginalized communities. By erasing the history, they attempt to sever the link. They want to isolate present-day problems from their historical roots, making them seem intractable, natural, or the fault of the communities suffering from them. This is a strategy to induce a sense of hopelessness and to delegitimize calls for justice. If there is no historical context for why a neighborhood is poor, then there is no historical obligation to repair the damage. By fighting to keep Black history out of the classroom, they are fighting to protect a political narrative that absolves the nation of its responsibility to address the enduring legacies of slavery and segregation. They know that if people truly understand where we came from, they will have a much clearer and much more demanding vision of where we need to go. In a time when the truth is under siege, your awareness and action matter more than ever. The stories and struggles we've explored are not just pages in a textbook. They are the blueprint for understanding the world we live in today. By learning Black history, you equip yourself with the knowledge to challenge false narratives and demand a more honest, inclusive future. Don't let this conversation end here. Share this video to spark dialogue in your community, your schools, and your circles of influence. Encourage others to seek out the stories that have been silenced and support organizations and educators working to keep Black history alive in classrooms everywhere. Education is resistance. Your curiosity, your voice, and your support are powerful tools against the forces of erasure. Subscribe to our channel for more content like this and join us in the fight to preserve, teach, and honor Black history, not just for today, but for generations to come. The erasure of Black history is not happening by accident. It is a deliberate and calculated campaign being executed with the full force of state power. The primary weapon in this war on memory is legislation. Across the country, particularly in states governed by right-wing leaders, lawmakers are introducing and passing bills designed specifically to control what teachers can say and what students can learn about American history. These laws are often dressed up in deceptive language, using phrases like prohibiting divisive concepts or promoting patriotic education. But their true purpose is to create a legal framework for censorship, to build a wall around the uncomfortable truths of the nation's past. These are not proposals to refine curriculum. They are mandates to enforce ignorance. This legislative strategy is insidious because it creates a legal justification for erasing history. For example, in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis championed and signed the Stop Woke Act, which severely restricts how race can be discussed in schools and workplaces. The law was then used as the basis for the state's decision to reject a new advanced placement course on African American studies, with the administration claiming it lacks educational value and promotes indoctrination. This wasn't just a disagreement over a lesson plan. It was the state government officially declaring that a comprehensive study of Black history is, by its nature, illegitimate. This sets a chilling precedent, giving legal cover to school districts that choose to gut their own history programs. The impact of these laws extends far beyond a single course. They're designed to be intentionally vague, creating a minefield of uncertainty for educators. When a law forbids any teaching that could cause a student to feel guilt or anguish because of their race, how can a teacher honestly discuss the brutality of slavery or the horrors of lynching? The risk of misinterpretation of a parent complaint leading to an investigation or dismissal becomes too high. This forces teachers to preemptively censor themselves, avoiding any topic that could be deemed controversial. The law doesn't need to explicitly ban the teaching of Harriet Tubman's life. It simply creates a climate so hostile to the truth that the teacher decides it's safer to mention her only in passing, if at all. This weaponization of the law is a top-down strategy to institutionalize a whitewashed version of the American story. It moves the battle from the realm of academic debate into the courts and state houses, where political power, not historical accuracy, determines the outcome. It is a systematic effort to make the teaching of honest history a professional liability. By passing these laws, politicians are not just influencing education. They are attempting to codify a national mythology. They are building a legal architecture that protects a comfortable lie while punishing the uncomfortable truth, ensuring that future generations are taught a history that serves a political agenda rather than the cause of genuine understanding. Beyond passing restrictive laws, the architects of this erasure campaign are employing another powerful tactic: cutting off the resources that sustain Black history and culture. This is a quieter, more bureaucratic form of attack, but it is just as devastating. Public libraries, cultural centers, and Black history museums are the keepers of our collective memory. They house the archives, preserve the artifacts, and provide the spaces for communities to learn and engage with their past. These institutions are now finding themselves in the crosshairs, facing threats of significant budget cuts or complete defunding, especially if their programming is deemed too political or divisive by the prevailing political powers. This is a deliberate strategy to starve the storytellers into silence. The logic is brutally simple. If you can't ban the story, you can bankrupt the institutions that tell it. In communities across the country, school libraries are being targeted, with librarians facing pressure to remove books about Black historical figures or the civil rights movement. When they resist, they face threats to their entire budget, leveraged by an angry minority of parents backed by national activist groups. The same pressure is applied to public museums. An exhibit that honestly portrays the history of racial violence in a town or the struggle for desegregation can trigger a political backlash, leading local or state funders to pull their support. This forces institutions into an impossible choice: sanitize their exhibits to appease politicians or risk their financial survival. This financial pressure is coupled with a relentless campaign of demoralization against the people on the front lines, the educators, librarians, and curators. These dedicated professionals are being publicly vilified. They are branded as radical indoctrinators, accused of pushing a political agenda, and subjected to online harassment and threats. At heated school board meetings, teachers who have spent their lives inspiring students are shouted down and accused of hating America. This constant barrage of hostility is designed to wear them down, to make their jobs untenable. The goal is to drive passionate, knowledgeable educators out of the profession, leaving behind a workforce that is too intimidated to teach anything but the officially approved, sanitized version of history. The combined effect of defunding and demoralization is the slow, steady erosion of the infrastructure that preserves and transmits Black history. When a library's budget is slashed, it cannot acquire new books that tell these vital stories. When a museum's funding is threatened, it scales back its programming. When a teacher is demoralized, they lose the passion and courage required to teach difficult truths. This is how the erasure happens, not with a single dramatic act, but through 1,000 cuts. It's a war of attrition designed to ensure that even if the laws are one day overturned, the institutions and the people needed to teach the history will have already been hollowed out. One of the most insidious methods of erasure is the manipulation of language itself. The architects of this campaign understand that if you can control the words we use to describe the past, you can control how we understand it. This is a form of historical gaslighting, a deliberate effort to downplay brutality by replacing accurate descriptive terms with sanitized, misleading euphemisms. It is an attempt to rewrite the dictionary of oppression so that the crimes of the past no longer sound like crimes. This linguistic detoxification is happening in textbooks, in state curriculum standards, and in the talking points of politicians who seek to make history more palatable to a white audience. The most infamous example of this came from Texas, where the State Board of Education considered curriculum standards that would have referred to the millions of Africans brought to America in chains as workers, and described the transatlantic slave trade as the Atlantic Triangular Trade. In another instance, a textbook publisher offered to describe slavery as involuntary relocation to appease the board. While public outcry often pushes back on the most egregious examples, the impulse behind them persists. The goal is to strip the violence and inhumanity from the language, transforming the institution of chattel slavery, a system of lifelong heritable bondage, torture, and exploitation, into something that sounds more like an unfortunate labor arrangement. This revisionist language extends beyond slavery. It is used to soften the reality of the entire history of racial oppression. The Jim Crow era, a period of state-sponsored racial terrorism, might be described simply as a time of racial separation, a violent race massacre where hundreds of Black citizens were murdered and their community destroyed, might be blandly labeled a race riot, implying equal culpability between the white perpetrators and their Black victims. By changing the words, they change the meaning. Oppression becomes disagreement. Systemic racism becomes racial tensions. This is more than just semantic games. It is a moral and historical distortion designed to absolve the perpetrators and minimize the suffering of the victims. This deliberate corruption of language is a powerful tool of erasure because it works subtly, seeping into the consciousness of students and the public. If a generation of children learns to call enslaved people workers, they will never fully grasp the horror of what was done to them. They will not understand that these were not people who had a bad job. They were people who were treated as property, with no rights, no freedom, and no control over their own bodies or families. This linguistic cleansing is the final step in the sanitization process. It allows the historical narrative to keep the events but discard the meaning, creating a version of the past that is factually hollow and morally bankrupt. To ask why Black history matters is to ask why the heart matters to the body, or why the foundation matters to a house. Black history is not a separate, optional chapter of the American saga, to be relegated to a single month or an elective course. It is the central, indispensable narrative that gives meaning to the entire American experiment. To erase Black history is not just to delete a few stories. It is to hollow out America's soul, leaving behind a nation that cannot understand itself, its triumphs, its contradictions, or its purpose. The story of Black Americans is the story of the nation's deepest hypocrisies and its highest ideals, often embodied in the very same historical moments. It is the story of a people who, while being denied the promise of America, fought and died to force America to live up to it. The attempt to frame Black history as something separate from American history is a deliberate political strategy designed to marginalize its importance. It suggests that the experiences of Black people are a niche interest, relevant only to Black communities. But this could not be further from the truth. The fight for Black freedom has defined and redefined the meaning of freedom for every American. The legal battles waged by Black Americans, from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to landmark Supreme Court cases, have shaped the constitutional rights that all citizens enjoy today. The struggle against slavery and Jim Crow was not just a fight for Black people. It was a battle for the moral conscience of the country, a battle that continues to this day. When we treat Black history as a separate entity, we fail to see the intricate ways it is woven into every aspect of the nation's development. You cannot accurately teach the history of the United States economy without discussing the system of chattel slavery that built its initial wealth. You cannot tell the story of American music, from jazz and blues to rock and roll and hip-hop, without acknowledging its origins in Black culture and experience. You cannot explore the history of American democracy without examining the centuries-long struggle for Black suffrage that exposed the limitations of that democracy and pushed it to become more inclusive. Black history is not an addendum. It is the main text. Therefore, the preservation of Black history is a universal imperative. It is essential for every American, regardless of their race or background, because it provides the critical context needed to navigate our complex society. It teaches us about power, resilience, and the enduring struggle for justice. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, not to induce guilt, but to foster a mature and honest understanding of who we are as a nation. By insisting that Black history is American history, we are not being divisive. We are demanding a more complete, more accurate, and more truthful account of our shared past, which is the only foundation upon which a truly united future can be built. If you want to understand the most pressing social and political issues facing America today, you must first understand Black history. It is not merely a collection of stories from the past. It is the essential blueprint for deciphering the present. It provides the why behind the inequalities that persist in our society, transforming abstract statistics into the logical outcomes of a long and documented history of policy and practice. Without this historical context, the challenges facing Black communities can be easily misdiagnosed, attributed to individual or cultural failings rather than to the enduring legacy of systemic barriers. Black history is the key that unlocks a true understanding of modern America. Consider the persistent and profound racial wealth gap. Without history, it is an inexplicable economic anomaly. But when you understand the history of slavery, where generations of Black people were themselves property, forbidden from owning anything, when you learn about the broken promise of 40 acres and a mule, when you study the history of redlining, which systematically denied Black families access to federally backed home loans and the opportunity to build generational wealth, the wealth gap is no longer a mystery. It is the predictable, cumulative result of centuries of economic exclusion. Understanding this history is the first step toward crafting meaningful solutions. The same is true for the criminal justice system. To understand why Black Americans are incarcerated at vastly disproportionate rates, one must look to the past. The history of the 13th Amendment's loophole, which allows for slavery or involuntary servitude as a punishment for a crime, led directly to the system of convict leasing and chain gangs that effectively re-enslaved Black men after the Civil War. This history provides the context for understanding how the war on drugs and other racially biased policing and sentencing policies have continued this legacy, creating the mass incarceration crisis we see today. Without Black history, you cannot see the straight line that connects the plantation to the prison. From housing segregation to disparities in healthcare and education, Black history provides the indispensable framework for analysis. It explains why so many of our cities remain segregated, a direct result of restrictive covenants and white flight. It sheds light on the roots of medical mistrust among Black Americans, born from a history of unethical experimentation like the Tuskegee study. The fight to bury this history is a fight to obscure these connections. Those who benefit from the status quo want people to see these problems as disconnected and unsolvable. Because when people wake up and understand the root causes, they begin to demand systemic change. And that is a threat to a system built on and sustained by inequality. To focus only on the history of oppression is to tell an incomplete story. Black history matters profoundly because it is also a powerful, inspiring chronicle of unparalleled contribution and unshakable resilience. Despite facing centuries of the most brutal and dehumanizing conditions, Black Americans have not only survived, they have innovated, created, and led in every single field of human endeavor, enriching the nation and the world in countless ways. To erase Black history is to erase this legacy of genius and fortitude, to rob all Americans of the lessons and inspiration that come from these incredible stories. It is a history that showcases the boundless potential of the human spirit in the face of relentless adversity. In the realm of science and innovation, Black Americans have consistently broken barriers. The agricultural innovations of George Washington Carver revolutionized farming in the South. The mathematical brilliance of Katherine Johnson and her fellow Hidden Figures was essential to putting NASA astronauts into space. Dr. Charles Drew's pioneering work in blood storage techniques saved countless lives during World War II and beyond. From Garrett Morgan's invention of the three-light traffic signal to the modern-day achievements of scientists and engineers, Black brilliance has been a driving force of American progress, often while its creators were denied basic recognition and rights. The legacy of contribution is just as profound on the battlefield and in the fight for the nation's ideals. Crispus Attucks, a Black man, was the first to fall in the American Revolution, dying for a liberty he would never know. From the colored troops who were pivotal in the Civil War to the celebrated Tuskegee Airmen who fought fascism abroad while facing racism at home, Black soldiers have served and sacrificed for America with distinction in every conflict. In the realm of law and justice, figures like Thurgood Marshall fundamentally reshaped American jurisprudence, using the legal system to dismantle the very segregation he had endured. This history of patriotic service and civic leadership is central to the American narrative. And of course, Black culture has become American culture. The rhythms and stories of Black America have given the world blues, jazz, gospel, rock and roll, and hip-hop. The literary genius of authors from Frederick Douglass and Zora Neale Hurston to Toni Morrison and Ta-Nehisi Coates has forced the nation to confront its conscience. This is not a marginal history. It is a history of a people who, despite every attempt to break their spirit, have continuously created beauty, forged progress, and defined the very essence of what it means to be American. This is the history they want to bury because it proves that Blackness is not a burden, but a source of profound strength and creativity. Make no mistake, the widespread assault on Black history is not a spontaneous eruption of parental concern or a series of disconnected local debates. It is a calculated and well-funded political strategy, orchestrated from the highest levels of the conservative movement. This is not just random political noise. It is part of a much larger, more ambitious project to reshape American society by controlling its foundational story. The primary goal is to stoke racial fear and resentment as a tool for political mobilization. By casting the honest teaching of history as an attack on white Americans and a threat to their children, these political actors create a powerful sense of grievance that can be harnessed at the ballot box. It is a cynical and divisive tactic that weaponizes education for partisan gain. The Trump administration provided a clear blueprint for this strategy with the creation of its 1776 Commission. This was not an academic body formed to pursue historical truth. It was a political entity designed explicitly to produce a rebuttal to works like the New York Times 1619 Project. The 1619 Project sought to reframe American history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at its very center. The ferocity of the backlash from the Trump administration and its allies revealed not just a disagreement but a deep-seated fear. They understood that a historical narrative centered on the Black experience directly challenged their own narrative of an unblemished, heroic America, a narrative crucial to their political identity. This fear is rooted in the knowledge that history shapes consciousness, and consciousness drives political action. If people truly understand the history of systemic racism, they are more likely to support policies aimed at rectifying it, such as voting rights protections, criminal justice reform, and economic equity initiatives. These are precisely the kinds of policies that the modern conservative movement opposes. Therefore, attacking the history is a way of attacking the foundation for these policy demands. By labeling historical truth as critical race theory or woke indoctrination, they create a toxic environment that makes it nearly impossible to have a rational, public conversation about the enduring legacy of racism. This strategy is ruthlessly effective because it transforms a complex issue into a simple, emotional one. It is no longer about historical accuracy. It is about protecting children from feeling guilty, defending patriotism from its supposed enemies, and fighting back against a perceived liberal elite. This framing energizes a specific voting base by giving them a tangible enemy to fight against in their local schools and communities. The political power behind this movement is not interested in an honest debate about the past. They are interested in winning a culture war, and they have identified Black history as a key battlefield where they believe they can score political points, no matter the cost to truth or national unity. A central pillar of this political strategy is the hijacking of the concept of patriotism. The forces seeking to erase Black history have skillfully wrapped their agenda in the American flag, presenting their campaign of censorship and revisionism as a profound act of national love. They argue that teaching the difficult and painful parts of America's past is an unpatriotic act, one that promotes division and hatred for the country. In its place, they advocate for what they call patriotic education, which is a euphemism for a state-sanctioned history that emphasizes national triumphs while ignoring or downplaying its moral failures. This creates a false dichotomy where you can either love America or you can tell the truth about it, but you cannot do both. This definition of patriotism is fundamentally weak and insecure. It suggests that the United States is so fragile that it cannot withstand an honest examination of its own past. A true, robust patriotism is not based on ignoring a nation's flaws, but on having the courage to confront them and the commitment to work toward correcting them. The Black freedom struggle is, in fact, one of the most patriotic stories in American history. It is the story of a people who, despite being subjected to the worst of America, consistently believed in the nation's founding ideals and fought to make them a reality for all. To erase that struggle is to erase a profound act of patriotic faith and sacrifice. The political power behind this movement uses this distorted patriotism as a shield to deflect any and all criticism. When educators push back against censorship, they are accused of being un-American. When historians present documented facts about slavery or Jim Crow, they are labeled as radicals who hate the country. This tactic effectively shuts down debate as it reframes a discussion about historical evidence as a test of one's loyalty. It is a powerful tool for silencing dissent because few people want to be publicly branded as unpatriotic. This allows the revisionists to advance their agenda under a veneer of moral righteousness, all while actively undermining the principles of free inquiry and intellectual honesty that a healthy democracy requires. Ultimately, this weaponized patriotism is a cover for an agenda of white nationalism. The patriotic history they champion is one where the contributions and perspectives of Black Americans and other minority groups are minimized, and the narrative is centered almost exclusively on the experiences of white Americans. It seeks to preserve a social hierarchy where whiteness is treated as the default and normative American identity. By attacking the truth tellers and gaslighting educators, they are not defending the nation. They are defending a specific exclusionary version of it. They know that when people understand the full multiracial story of America, they will demand a more inclusive and just future. And that is the outcome this movement is politically committed to preventing at all costs. The battle for Black history is a battle for the future of America. The stakes could not be higher. We stand at a crossroads where one path leads to a more honest, empathetic, and just society, built on a complete understanding of our shared past, and the other leads back into the darkness of ignorance, division, and a national identity founded on a comfortable lie. We cannot be passive observers in this fight. The forces seeking to erase history are organized, well-funded, and relentless. They will not stop unless we, the people who believe in the power of truth, stand up to meet their challenge with equal, if not greater, determination. Protecting our history is not someone else's job. It is a sacred responsibility that falls upon each and every one of us. This is a fight that must be waged on multiple fronts. We must defend our story in the halls of power and in the heart of our communities. This means speaking up at local school board meetings, demanding that our children be taught a full and accurate history, not a sanitized and censored one. It means supporting the institutions that serve as the guardians of our memory, the Black History museums, the community archives, and the public libraries that are now under siege. We must use our voices and our resources to protect the educators, librarians, and curators who are on the front lines of this battle, who face harassment and intimidation for simply doing their jobs. Their courage must be met with our unwavering support. The most powerful act of resistance, however, is to become storytellers ourselves. If they ban the books from the school library, we must ensure those books are in our homes, our churches, and our community centers. If the lessons are silenced in the classroom, we must teach them around our dinner tables. We must actively seek out the stories that have been suppressed to learn them and to share them. We must support the work of Black historians, writers, filmmakers, and artists who are dedicated to preserving and illuminating this essential history. We must ensure that the truth is not only preserved, but that it is passed on, a vibrant and living legacy for the next generation. The truth has its own power, but only if it is spoken. This is not a struggle about the past alone. It is a struggle for the kind of country we want to be. Forgetting where we have been makes it impossible to chart a course for where we need to go. Black history is not about shame or guilt. It is about truth. And truth is the only tool we have to heal our nation's deepest wounds and to finally build a society that lives up to its promise of liberty and justice for all. The work is hard, but it is necessary. We must keep learning. We must keep teaching. And above all, we must never stop remembering. The future is in our hands, and it will be shaped by the history we choose to defend today. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel to join a community committed to truth, justice, and the full story of Black history. Share this video with your friends, your family, and your networks, because every voice helps amplify the call for honesty and understanding. Take action beyond the screen. Support your local educators, visit Black history museums, and challenge attempts to silence the truth wherever you see them. Together, we can protect our past and shape a future worthy of us all. Stand up, speak out, stay connected. The fight for truth continues, and it needs you.